So we are beginning with the Haitian Revolution is where we leave off in 2B. This is something you're probably going to want to know for the FRQ. Let me grab this. Because it's one of the biggest successful slave revolts, right? So enslaved people are successfully overthrowing the French government. This is the only slave uprising to successfully overthrow its colonial government, because you got to remember the colonial government is really entrenched in these areas, even though enslaved people in a lot of America are actually outnumbering the people, the number of Europeans who live there. So you also have Maroons, which is something that also is known in this unit, who are really helping with this revolution happening. But this is going to have three main direct effects. Number one, France abolishes slavery. So this is temporary, but it does do this. This is under Napoleon. Napoleon has a lot of stuff going on right now, right? So that's Napoleon. Number two, Napoleon is sells the Louisiana territory. And number three, France has to, Haiti now has to pay reparations. Cool, right? So this is going to mean a couple things for Haiti. Let's see. So France abolishing slavery, good for Haiti, right? Awesome. But let's see, for Haiti reparations to France. But what we're going to actually see is this is going to be a lot of time of struggle for Haiti, because they're going to be really hindered by these reparations, right? They're going to have to spend a lot of time paying this off. This is really expensive for them. And then with the effects of America, because we are talking African American studies here, right? We're actually going to see slavery expand, because the thing is, with the Louisiana territory now existing, there's so much more space that obviously plantations can be built in, that slavery can expand onto. And then you're also going to see a lot of fear mongering about this, because we have the Alien and Sedition Acts. This is what this is actually going to lead to. Right, and that's because Haitian Revolution, for Haitian refugees who are coming to the United States, and news of the revolution are increasing fears in these old white guys about slave revolts. But actually, we're going to see some indirect positive impacts in the United States as well. This is going to inspire people to do things like the slave removal in Louisiana, just like that territory that we said was just acquired. We also see an uprising of Muslim slaves. Right, and these are happening in like around 1811. This is 1835, because you have to keep in mind Haitian Revolution. Something really good to do with the AP exams is remembering dates, because every once in a while they'll just throw a time period at you and they'll expect you to know some events of this, side of this. And then also, I'm seeing a chat. I'm remembering how to check chat, guys. That this is increasing rebellions in the United States. Yes, everyone's being inspired by Haiti's independence. So Haitian Revolution is this huge, huge, huge event. Some people have said it's as influential as the American Revolution. Even though it doesn't necessarily end super well for Haiti, even though they get their independence, they do still have to pay reparations for a really long time. In the United States, it's going to inspire a lot of change. So something else that we're talking about in Unit 2B is, remember, only around 5% of people who are coming from the transatlantic slave trade are actually going to the USA. The other 95% are going to the British Islands and the Caribbean, and then they're going to Brazil, which is a huge hotspot for slavery. I don't anticipate this being a huge thing on your exam, but things I would know is that even though there are so many people who are going to Brazil, actually, Brazil is going to have a much, much larger free black population, unlike the United States, where manumission, I would know the word in manumission. Manumission is happens in Brazil way more often than the United States. In the United States, is extremely rare. In the number of enslaved Africans in the United States after the 1808 transatlantic slave trade ban is really only going to increase. The domestic slave trade in the United States is crazy. But in Brazil, something I would know is that there are a lot of cultural practices here. African American studies really wants you to learn about cultural practices. Um, let's see, you have the celebration of the King of Congo and Our Lady of the Rosary, right? You have an economy that's obviously focused on sugar plantations, gold mines, coffee plantations, cattle, textile production, but there are these cultural practices that are preserved, right? So going to move on with that. In the United States, we are going to focus on forms of resistance. Resistance is something really huge to know. I would know resistance on ships. I would know resistance in the fields, and I would know intellectual resistance. Okay, so we already talked about ships in the Unit 2A video. That's things like jumping overboard. That's things like seizing. That's refusing to eat. And the underlying theme of all these, what I would write on an FRQ or DBQ or something like that, is that we're resisting dehumanization with these. When we get to the fields, though, there are a lot of different ways. So I would say some of them, they kind of get split into violent and non-violent. So we have our daily methods, which are our non-violent ones, right? That a lot of people are doing. So that's things like slowing work, we're breaking tools, we're stealing food, we're running away. When you get to Black women in the fields, a lot of them are attempting to resist assault. They're fighting attackers. They're abortion-inducing plans. They're running away. Yes, refusing to use one of those, I would say it's covert, but I don't think on the AP exam they're ever going to question whether you're doing one or the other. So these daily methods are actually really important. I think that on an FRQ you would really easily be able to get away with them. Intellectual here, I would say something like writing and talking about abolitionism and female rights. So maybe an example you could know is Maria Stewart, who publishes a political manifesto, but you can also know about things like slave narratives. That's people who are resisting often at auction. Black women specifically are publishing a lot of these, and they're emphasizing like vulnerability and sexual violence, or even men are emphasizing autonomy and manhood. So there's a little bit gendered here, but basically intellectually, even people like Phyllis Wheatley, they're resisting the narrative of dehumanization, right? But then when we get to revolts, right? Honestly, when it comes to revolts, I would just memorize, if you're really cramming, I would just memorize maybe two or three. I don't think you have to know every single one in detail. So the first recorded U.S. slave revolt is in 1526, but some of the ones that are happening in America, right, in 1811 in Louisiana. You're having, just like Louisiana, just like we mentioned with the Haitian Revolution earlier, you're having a lot of people, 500 people who are marched towards New Orleans. This gets super violently suppressed. But it's an example of enslaved people organizing, right? In 1822, you have Denmark Vesey's plot, which doesn't actually come to fruition. He wants to take over Charleston, but it ends up being violently suppressed. And remember, Charleston, South Carolina is huge port for slave trading. 48% of enslaved people who came to the United States were here. So when we go to 1831, we have Nat Turner's Rebellion. This is in Virginia. This is the most deadly. I would know that. This is one that where people are actually rising up, unlike Denmark Vesey's plot, where it gets foiled by somebody leaking plans the day before. Nat Turner's Rebellion actually happens, and it's extremely violent, but it ends up getting violently suppressed. And you see a lot of things like slave codes being enacted after this. And then maybe one more I would know is 1841, with the Creole Mutiny, which is something that happens on a ship. So think something like the La Amistad almost. Where a domestic slave brig is being seized and then it's being driven somewhere else. So in the case of the Creole Mutiny, Madison, Washington is driving it to the Free British Colony, which is the Bahamas, right? So we'll get to some other rebellions. But those are just some to know. Another form of resistance, there's organizing. Yes, Stono and Fort Mose are really important to know. We'll get to those in a second. There's churches. Again, these go back to sort of these nonviolent ways that we've been talking about above. Churches, mutual aid societies, So a lot of the ways are we're uplifting each other. In the North, you get to a little bit of political organizing, and especially in the North, you can get mutual aid societies funding Black schools, businesses, churches, writers, speakers, etc. And then we have people like Miss Truth, Frederick Douglass. One that the AP exam really, really likes you to know is resisting dehumanization through photography. Depends whether or not your teachers actually did this, but they're supposed to dedicate an entire day of class instruction just to talking about photography, like Frederick Douglass was the most photographed man in the 19th century. We'll get to Augustine, right? So I promise you guys, these are really big. They come a little bit later. So from this page, I think a lot of these are kind of intuitive. I don't think you guys really need to spend that much time memorizing them. So in the fields, you can just think people breaking tools, people refusing to do work. Intellectual people are writing. They're being photographed. They're organizing. Ships, people are refusing to eat, or they're jumping, or they're seizing control of the ship. And then we have these examples of even things like Denmark Vesey's plot that aren't actually coming to fruition, but they're just examples of how even in these super extreme conditions, we have people who are still managing to resist dehumanization. So we are going to get to, let me see, actually. We can go to Stono Rebellion and Fort Augustine. It looks like that was actually, in fact, in Unit 2, but let me, Unit A video, but let me pull that up real quick. And we'll go to that. Yes, pars secreta ventrum, offspring follows the womb. And I think that's also something that we talk about in Unit 2A with the societal construction of race. I'm looking through my Google Docs right now, guys. Yes, I can slow down, guys. I know some people are gonna watch this. I've got some friends who are watching this right after, right before the exam. So I'm trying to give a shortened version, but I will tell the rest of them to go in 2x speed. Let's see where we're at. Okay. Found the doc. I'll slow down. We'll talk about some more freedom, enslavement, resistance. Okay. So when it gets to Stono Rebellion and Formose, right? You gotta remember, free states weren't actually free at this point in time, so African Americans are fleeing to other spaces. These are probably the biggest examples of this. St. Augustine is the oldest continually occupied European established settlement in the United States, right? Which sounds really complex, but basically it was founded in Florida. It's just in modern day Florida, that's why I'd know. Owned by Spanish. And they say that enslaved people who want to become Catholic are able to work and they're able to purchase their freedom. So a lot of people, African Americans, are going to flock for this. The Spanish think this is good because they want to destabilize their enemies' empires and all of that. And you see one of the who seeks a sanctuary is this guy, who I don't think you'll need to know the name of. But he's, hello, I did not spell that correctly. But he is going to fight alongside Native people, and he's going to fight against the English enslavers, and he's going to go on to lead Fort Mose, which is just north of St. Augustine. So that's going to be one example of a free Black town. Right, so then that's where we go there. So another person who's getting a sanctuary just like this guy is Jemmy. And he's from the region of Angola, which you aren't going to need to know, but he leads nearly 100 enslaved African Americans in a march towards Spanish Florida. Yeah, you guys got it in chat. But he's setting fires to plantations along the way. It is destructive. This is the Stono Rebellion, just like people are talking about. So most American history classes are covering this. And that's because in response to the Stono Rebellion, and this is a really good cause and effect to know because this is covered in a lot of American history classes. Yes, Jemmy is the Stono Rebellion. This is the section we're looking at right here. Just like in a lot of your American history classes, they're going to tell you that South Carolina is going to pass a super restrictive slave code. 1740, right? Which is going to restrict movement. It's going to enact a lot of harsh punishments for basically just being alive or doing anything in America as a Black person. So that gets a lot of our resistance out of the way when we're talking with this one. I want to jump back to, I think that's something that might come up on FRQs is debates within Black communities because they do really like immigration. Guys, for the DBQ, I will say, for pretty much any FRQ or response questions, this exam is pretty new, so they really can curveball anything this year, right? They're kind of experimenting with all the materials that they're putting up. I wish I could give a set in stone FRQ prediction, but really think the best way to do it is just to look at ones from last year's, and we can do that at the end of this. Hopefully, Edward, not sure how long this is go. I can stay as long as you guys want, but I'm gonna try to get the key content done in like an hour and a half, basically. But I'm gonna get to debates within Black communities. This is within the 2B if you guys want to follow along. I think there should be a Google Doc in the communities tab. There's emigration versus anti-immigration. So this emigrationists are people who think that African Americans need to relocate, just like we said before, people who were going to Spanish Florida, but now we're talking about people who want to go to Latin America, they want to go to the Caribbean, they want to go West Africa. So one of these person that we probably want to know is Martin Delany, who founds Black nationalism. And he really believes that Black nationalism is not going to happen in the USA, that we need to emigrate and we need to resettle. Versus on the anti-immigration, you have your Frederick Douglasses. People who want basically to people who think that Black Americans should be able to make their space within the here. And then on the other hand, there's also moral suasion and then radical resistance. Yes, we also do have right here, who's going to take people to Freetown in Sierra Leone. I don't think that'll be tested, but which is why I underscore Delaney, because he's a guy who's talked about in a lot of history classes. But I will post a live, guys. I promised a couple friends this. Another thing you should know is this debate between moral suasion and radical resistance, which I think is actually more likely to come up on the exam than the first one. Moral suasion are kind of your incrementalists. They believe that slavery can be overthrown just by appealing to the morals and ethics of white people and convincing them that's something really important. Radical resistance are your direct action. They're people who are really into revolt, if necessary, violence. This becomes more popular in the 1830s or 40s, and they don't want to wait for white people, right? So then some of this radical stuff that goes on is like the Underground Railroad. Which I had to explain to someone actually a few months ago was not an actual railroad. So let's be totally transparent about that. So that's a network of Black and white abolitionists, and they are providing transportation and shelter. Yes, using religion as moral suasion, logic, understanding, all those. This is not moral suasion. This is just now we're going to the north. People who are helping Black Americans escape to the north. Or in many cases, when the North isn't safe. Remember, North is doing a lot of legislation against Black Americans at this time. There's also Canada and Mexico. And the Underground Railroad, obviously the most important figure that we know with this is Harriet Tubman, who has been described as literally Moses before. Something cool that you could know about her, came up on one of my tests, is that she was a spy for the Union at some point, and she was also a nurse. But the most important thing that you should know is that she fled enslavement on her own, but she went back at least 19 times, which is insane, back and forth, just in order to rescue more enslaved people, right? So a lot of people are going to be freed by the Underground Railroad. Obviously, not all enslaved people, but 300,000. And then eventually their freedom, though, is going to lead to the establishment of the Fugitive Slave Acts. Fugitive Slave. She did lead the river raid. That's all. Also, yes, I'll go to a unit 3 right after this. Right. So the Fugitive Slave Act's really important to know. Actually, I think this is a really big piece of legislation of here. So when it comes to Fugitive Slave Act, they're basically allowing local governments, and this is 1793 and 1850. It's basically allowing local governments to to kidnap refugees or kidnap people in the north. It basically says if you see a black person, even if they're free, you can basically put out a bounty for them, pick them up, and send them to the south arbitrarily, right? So fugitive slave acts are obviously really terrible for freed black people. They have people threaten their safety, right? You even see some people going to places, even some intellectuals going to places like France because they are so afraid of these fugitive slave acts. So Harriet Tubman, just like we touched on, Harriet Tubman is going to eventually be a spy for the Union, yes, because she's so understanding of the terrain in the Civil War. And one thing that I would know here that could be for Q is that African Americans are huge in the Civil War. They help the Civil War. Men become soldiers and builders. They're initially excluded from serving in the Union Army, but they come to be allowed in combat roles after Emancipation Proclamation. And who is that by? Lincoln. So Emancipation Proclamation has men enlist as soldiers. I would say on pretty much no AP exam are you ever going to need to know the exact date, but I would know roughly the range because every once in a while they're going to throw a question at you. And if you bring up something about the Aksumite Empire and they're in the year 1700, you're probably not going to get credit for that. So what I like to do is memorize most things in chronological order, right? And then memorize the key dates of some things, like memorize when slavery ended, memorize like when the Civil War started, or either of those dates is fine. Find a couple arbitrary things from the middle of the unit that you can use kind of as goalposts. And then, so if you understand roughly the chronological order, then when you get a question on the FRQ, you can kind of guess what is going to fill in there. I don't actually know if you will be required to know a date for a court case, but I would just know I can start to make a timeline and we can draft one together. Uh, but we'll get to, let's see, with the Civil War. More roles, ways African Americans helped in the Civil War. Women, we're almost done with 2B. We're cooks, nurses, laundresses, and if you were Harriet Tubman or one of many other women, you could be a spy, right? Um, Free Black Americans are joining the Union Army. They raise money for refugees. They do, like you said, mutual aid, building schools, offering medical care. Many are fleeing the South to join Union war effort. They're fleeing the South for this, right? So eventually this leads to Juneteenth. And Juneteenth is a holiday I don't think will heavily be tested, but we will cover it anyways. Even after the Emancipation Proclamation, here's a date you guys could know. 1863, Emancipation. Dred Scott is a lot earlier, but we can talk about Dred Scott is we're making the establishment that African Americans are never allowed to be citizens, and this is to the point where they're even getting the right to not be enslaved and to live freely. So Emancipation Proclamation, but a lot of African Americans kept working at this point. It took especially in border states, legal enslavement was continuing, right? So that's why we have something like the 13th Amendment. So Juneteenth is celebrating that the day that in Texas, Galveston, Texas, to be specific. Enslaved people are informed that they're free. They get absolute equality, which is super radical, super crazy, and it becomes a federal holiday eventually because people are having spirituals, wearing clothing, celebrating. This can be an example of Black joy. But we'll talk about, I think, because some people have read through that cheat sheet, I think something that I would really like people to be able to cover is Unit 3, which now we are generally moving on to. Everything else should have been covered before or should have been covered in a YouTube video in the past. I completely support anyone skipping before or after this exam. Been there. So we're basically talking about Reconstruction. We're talking about after the Civil War, just like we ended off with the Civil War. Unit 2 covers so much stuff. But Reconstruction is the period after the Civil War where we're figuring out what the country is going to be, right? So the federal government needs to integrate Confederate states, and they also need to protect Black rights at the same time. So we get the 13th Amendment, the 14th, and the 15th, right? And I don't think you'll need to know exact dates for these, but please know like roughly this time. Don't assume this happened in 1600 because you can miss points that way. So the 15th is 1870. So the 13th is going to formally abolish slavery. And we talked about why that was important. Now, they did say that you could do this thing called convict leasing, where you're basically allowed to enslave people as punishment for a crime. So you're going to see a lot of people get put in jail for reasons that are kind of completely pointless. We'll cover that in 1 second. The 14th Amendment is birthright citizenship. So this is where Dred Scott comes into play. We were just talking about Dred Scott, right? Dred Scott was in 1857, I want to say. Dred Scott versus Stanford is where we're making a decision that African Americans cannot become citizens. They never will become citizens. And so when we have birthright citizenship, we say anyone who's born in the United States, no matter who they are, is a citizen automatically. So this is kind of radical. This is completely overturning it. Double check this date on this, somebody please. But 15th Amendment is going to give voting rights to African Americans, but specifically to men, because at this point, we are not up there with women yet. We can't discriminate on account of race, color, previous condition. And this is going to allow people actually to serve on public offices. Although this is going to be kind of sketchily implemented. We'll see in a second. So we're also going to have to figure out how we're going to reunite Black families, and we're going to use this thing called the Freedmen's Bureau. Because you gotta remember, Black families were hugely separated during the domestic slave trade. You could see a mother and a son who were put thousands of miles apart, right? Just because they're sold at a slave auction. So, two ways that the government are helping, and obviously enslaved or formerly enslaved African Americans are looking in newspapers. Now they get the freedom to pick surnames, which they didn't get before. They are getting legal marriages. And those are hugely helpful in just being able to relocate the people who are your family members. But the Freedmen's Bureau, right, is what we'll now say. Is a government agency. And we want to help formally enslaved people, and we're going to have them transition in citizenship because it's hard. It's a hard jump to make, obviously. So we're giving clothing, schooling. They do some other stuff too, like technically they manage abandoned Civil War property, but I don't think in any observable universe they're going to quiz you on that. So Freedmen's Bureau is a government agency that directly helps enslaved people. Special field orders are something I really hope got covered in your classes. But Sherman gives these. Sherman is this Union general, and he wants to give 40 acres. This is where, think of Kendrick Lamar's halftime show, the 40 acres and a mule comes from. Because he wants to give 40 acres of land to each newly freed African American family. He wants to levy the playing field in a different way. But this, unfortunately, even though it's super radical and it would definitely level the playing field really radically, instead it gets revoked by President Andrew Johnson. President Andrew Johnson. Unfortunately, and everyone who gets those 40 acres ends up being evicted or they're forced into sharecropping. And this is where we get into where Reconstruction kind of fails, right? Because the Freedmen Bureau seems pretty awesome. Special field orders, except for the fact they failed, seems pretty awesome. But then we get to black codes, which are these discriminatory laws that are just supposed to prevent or at very least limit the right of black people to own property, or they're requiring black people to enter into restrictive labor contracts. So they're basically trying to create a world in which black people aren't really free. And this is where sharecropping comes in. And if you had to know one thing about post-Reconstruction, sharecropping was huge. Sharecropping was hugely prevalent. So this is where you work on other people's land and you receive a share of the crop as payment. This obviously makes it pretty hard to leave because you don't have money. You maybe have enough food to feed yourself and you have a place to sleep. But if you want to save up so you can eventually head out and no longer live under this guy's roof, you're kind of screwed. So sharecrop owners, let's see. Sharecroppers often never made enough money to pay their debt, so they were stuck forever. You also have many Black Americans are wrongfully imprisoned during this period. So remember when we talked about in 13th Amendment, where technically you can still enslave people if they do a crime, right? So if you're a free Black person in the United States, you have two options. Number one is sharecropping, right? You find employment in any possible way you can. Most of these labor contracts that you're able to enter into are exploitative, that you can't exit it. You can do years of labor, you're gonna have nothing to your names, right? Some people say that this is another form of slavery. But your option number two, if you don't want to be sharecropping, is to be unemployed. And I know that you guys are right now, a lot of you for skipping school, but this is literally illegal for Black Americans, and that's because of something called vagrancy laws. So if you're caught being unemployed in the United States, you're going to be imprisoned and forced to do labor while you're incarcerated. So if you choose the unemployment path, you're going to get subjected to convict leasing, where prisoners have to do forced labor. They literally have to do slavery once again for landowners, corporations, institutions. Yes, unemployment was not the funny haha joke that was back then. So we also see a lot of other failures with Reconstruction in that there's a strict date that Reconstruction actually kind of ends. So there's a defeat of Reconstruction, basically, is how College Board phrases it. So states start reintroducing segregation in their constitutions, even if the federal government technically hasn't. So we get de jure, or in law, segregation. Where we get to voting rights, because remember that 15th Amendment was supposed to guarantee voting rights to everyone, but instead we have poll taxes, we have literary tests, we have grandfather taxes, grandfather clauses, and this is what some people are bringing up. Right. So your literary tests are not your typical literary tests that you might be thinking about, making sure that you can read a book. Your literacy tests are literally impossible questions, right? It's those questions that maybe your brother asked you while you were 5 years old, when you wanted to get the iPad from him, and he said, "Oh, my bad, you forgot that 1 + 1 = window, kid. You can actually, I'm sorry, I'm taking the Nintendo Switch," right? It's physically impossible for you to pass a literary test, basically. A white person might take them, and the proctor is going to let you walk on by. But for Black Americans, it's not. Poll taxes, it's obviously a bad thing to not let poor people be able to vote. We're pretty established with this. And with grandfather clauses, the entire concept is that when if your grandfather was enslaved, then you're unable to vote too. It's the same status as your grandfather. So we're not really letting people vote at this point in time. We're also having terrorists, right? This is your KKK. Your Ku Klux Klan, a lot of them are former Confederates. A lot of them are practicing lynching. Guys, I will get to Unit 4. Let me make another layer for this. Maybe we should have worked backwards with this, but Unit 4, or we will get to in a bit. So when we get to Plessy v. Ferguson, or let me link this with segregation again, and we I think this is a court case that you would actually want to know. This is when we're ruling in favor of segregation. We're saying it's okay to have quote unquote separate but equal in our schools. And then we're also having stuff like Jim Crow laws when we get further to the voting limitations. So Jim Crow is actually a derogatory term for African Americans. We don't want to use this, but having these laws that limit voting rights and endorse segregation are protected and they're fully legal under Plessy v. Ferguson. So we have this period between end of Reconstruction. If any of you guys are making a timeline, I would love to see. End of Reconstruction, basically, and then we have World War II or World War I, and this is called Nadir, which is the lowest point in US race relations, right? So we have some journalists who are fighting to expose Nadir. Remember, Ida B. Wells is a big one. She is really fighting to expose this terrible period in race relations. The activists are using skills like they're boycotting trolleys at this point in time, but truly, this is a bad time to be a minority in America. And let's get to some more of why this Nadir is happening. So that's our context. Red Summer is actually not one summer in particular. It's especially like 1919, which you can remember that's a nice date. But it's 1917 to 1921. Ida B, Argo as a collective. But there's a huge rise in hate crimes and urban race riots. There's a lot of discrimination against Black veterans from World War I, right? Where, let's see, in particular, there's a lot of resentment. There was, at this point in time, there was a global flu pandemic. There was competition for jobs. There was discrimination against Black veterans. And that leads up to this event, which is the Tulsa Race Massacre. Tell me if this pace is okay also. Where we are getting mobs of white residents and city officials who destroy more than 1,250 buildings, so that's homes and businesses, in Black Wall Street, which is technically called Greenwood. So, effects of racial violence. Obviously, racial violence is terrible. You kind of shouldn't need that much more to tell you that it's bad, right? But also, we see a lot of your teachers might have talked about generational wealth, right? So this is going to prevent, just like sharecropping did, it's going to prevent a lot of African Americans families from passing down wealth and property, right? So many are going to have this positive. They're going to publish, just like Ida being our goat, accounts. They're going to do self-defense. But overall, it's really hard to live in the South, basically, at this time. It's a really bad time for race relations in America. So instead of people living here, we end up getting the Great Migration. But first, for a second, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, let's talk about some more of those effects of intellectual, because we're talking about how people are publishing accounts, right? So we get the racism is portrayed in literature. So we have stuff like Dunbar. I would really just memorize the name of one or two of these people. W.E.B. Du Bois writes The Souls of Black Folk. I would not be terribly surprised if you have to read one of these excerpts, but please don't go onto piracy site and read The Souls of Black Folk right now. So, but he's just writing about how there's this color line in society that represents segregation, and Black folk are separated from full participation in society. Because we've just talked about how literally legislation exists just for this. We have double consciousness, which is this concept that they say which is internal conflict due to racism. It really fractures your sense of identity, right? We have Du Bois actually is clashing with this guy because he kind of wants a liberal arts education. He thinks all Black Americans should be super well-rounded. We should kind of learn about ideology. We should learn about the civil rights agenda. We want education in general, right? Versus Booker T. Washington. I'm gonna call him Booker T, who he thought African Americans, instead of doing this great migration stuff over here, he thought they should stay in South. And he thought that they should educate themselves to get enough to get jobs. So the goal of this is kind of agricultural, technical. Before we have political rights, get jobs, focus on education. That's going to let you get a job, right? So there's these two different approaches. This is education first. This is political activism second, right? But let's see. We could go on with some more thinkers. And again, I would know Booker T because I think I'm gonna write these down again. And WEB, because they have that clash over education that I think could be good to bring up in an FAQ. But let's see. I'll write down a couple more figures who are educators and they're suffragists. Let's see. Nanny here is going to associate the National Association of Colored Women. And again, from this page, besides this key conflict up here, I would just pick maybe one or two figures to memorize. James Weldon. They make the Black National Anthem. And besides Nanny, we have many other Black women who are contributing, who are entering workforce. Who are organizing labor unions. You guys have to watch Ed Puzzles? Who are starting clubs. But those are things that are done by a lot of people in the Black community at this point in time. So again, a lot of these other ways that people are kind of uplifting each other is through Black organizations like the Black Press, which is providing news, Black Christian churches, Ed Puzzles is crazy work, guys. Black Christian churches, right? And we remember already those were a place where people were able to organize. Let's see, Black business owners. Someone who might be really good to know here, who we experience the legacy of, is C.J. Walker, Madam C.J. Walker, who creates beauty products, hair products specifically for Black women, and she's the first female millionaire in the entire United States, Black or non-Black, right? My word after colored. Oh, this is woman. This is me being unable to write it. Madam C.J. Walker, we love Madam C.J. Walker. I'm gonna actually go though for a second. Let's go back to talking about, let's see, education debate. We have other institutions that are being created, HBCUs, right, which still exist today. We know Kamala Harris went to one. A lot of these actually, contrary to kind of popular belief, are established by white philanthropists, right? So our first one to be established by fully owned and operated by African Americans is founded by leaders in an African church, and that's Wilberforce University. I don't think you'll need to know Wilberforce, but I'll write it down if anyone else wants to. But in the realm of HBCUs, if you're going to learn about anything with HBCUs, I would learn about the Second Moral Act. Because this makes HBCUs into land grant. Whoa, what is going on here? Are we good? Hello? Whoa, are we good? I just got a notification that we're living now. Let me fix a VPN real quick. Maybe that could be it. Fix a VPN real quick. Maybe that could be it. Are we back? Yo, what's going on right now? Are we so back? Can we see Bunny, everyone? Are we back? Okay, wait, I'm retrying the chat right now to see if I can see you guys. Can you guys hear me? Whoa, I think we're working. Okay, we are so back, guys. Bunny exists. Bunny is here. Okay, fine. Let me get my notes pulled up again, and we'll go back to it. I guess it was a break for the FRQ reviewing, guys. I was just like getting it together. Obviously, no mistakes here. We were just talking about HBCUs. We were talking about the Second Moral Grant Act, which says if Black students can't go to white colleges, you have to at least create colleges they can go to, right? That's like a little too crazy even for us. So as a result, we end up creating 18 HBCUs. And this is going to allow a lot of people to rise up out of poverty because education, like taking AP exams, is maybe not the education they're doing. But this is going to allow for the things like Black Campus Movement. And the Black Campus Movement is what eventually gets us this class, which is just a movement to teach African American studies or teach Black studies on campuses, right? So some of these are vocational, some of these are liberal arts. But the difference between those, I don't think you'll super need to know. That's kind of similar to the Washington, Booker T. Washington, and the WB thing that we were talking about earlier. It was kind of mapped cleanly to one another if you want to add that to your notes. But there's other stuff that the College Board CET talks about. It's like they talk about a student choir at Fisk University called the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And they talk about Black Greek letter organizations, which are supporting leadership and community service. But I don't think you'll be asking about Black sororities. I think that would be pretty unlikely. But we do get to the New Negro movement and the Harlem Renaissance, right? And that's something that you should actually know. We were learning about tiny examples back there. But this is where we kind of get to cultural things. This is an umbrella term for a bunch of movements that want to celebrate artistic and cultural achievements of Black creators. They want to celebrate the Black aesthetic, which is the actual term, I'm not buzzwording right now, that they use. So people are going to move to urban areas from the south, the urban areas or rural areas in the south to urban areas in the north and Midwest. The Harlem Renaissance is one of these movements. And I wouldn't memorize this, but I would know at least Harlem Renaissance is like 1920s to 1930s ish, right? So you have black literary movements, artistic, intellectual life. You get a lot of jazz, a lot of people playing saxophones. It's really awesome. We all love the Harlem Renaissance. But we can see a lot of movements. Again, the College Board CED really, really, really wants you to know about photography. So one of these guys is James. I don't think you'll need to know this guy's in particular's name, James Van der Zee, and he's known for depicting Black people in Harlem. Maybe you'll see some of his work on the test, but I don't think that you'll need to have it memorized. And these people are just supposed to portray the everyday beauty of places like Harlem and everyday Black beauty. And we're also having poetry. These are just a lot of movements and artistic, right? So poetry, you're not going to be expected to know any poets. This isn't Phyllis Wheatley or anything like that, but you're going to want to know. They're using imagery. They're countering negative stereotypes about Africa. They're exploring personal relationships with Africa. They're exploring their African American identity. A lot of them, you're going to see a lot of poems on this. I know a lot of us are not very into poems, but these should be pretty straightforward. When in doubt, it's pretty much we're always exploring a personal relationship with Africa, and we're always reconciling something, right? We have Black musicians, music. So I would know that does not have a T in it. Blues. Unit 1, I actually talked about this. Blues music has its roots in slavery. It was beginning as acoustic music in the American South, and same with gospel. We are also having jazz in New Orleans. And out of this page and notes, I wouldn't just memorize a couple of these, like memorize photography or memorize that jazz music existed. You have performers. There is all Black musicals, Cabin in the Sky. If you're a musical head, I am not, I fear, but this would be fun to know. Or you have people working in Broadway on film. You have Ethel Waters, who is the first African American to star in her own television show. I think Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, if I remember right, actually gets mentioned in the College Board description of this course somewhere. But we also have, just like we talked about before, Black history education. Basically, these are all kind of social changes, right? This is kind of the stuff that your A-push teacher has you cram on the very last day. So we have Black intellectual tradition. Schools are like reinforcing the idea that Black people are making no contribution to the United States. If you took A-push, there was probably not much talking about the Black contribution. So we have the New Negro movement, which is creating resources to show otherwise. We have the African Free School, which is educating enslaved and free Black people in New York City in the late 18th century. But then now we're evolving. We have W.E.B., our guy again, who's a sociologist. We have the anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston, who writes some super influential books, which are documenting culture and heritage. Black History Month is historian Carter Goodwin Woodson. Right, but I think all these are cut short. The big thing I would know, guys, because I see some of you guys leaving, $50 is crazy work. My buy me a coffee, my buy me a Chipotle page going crazy. But we have the Great Migration. Good luck, everyone. You're all gonna do great. You can watch this video. I'll put up some more resources in the morning. We have the Great Migration. This is the super important thing I can know. Everything else I've said for the last 10 minutes, you can glaze over a little bit. Why did the Great Migration happen? There are labor shortages. why did this migration that caused basically all these social movements with the blues and the Harlem Renaissance and everything? There are labor shortages in the North because of the World Wars. So there are more job opportunities for in northern cities. There's also the environment in South is not good. There are floods, there's boll weevils, there's spoiled crops. A lot of Black Southerners are being impoverished. In the South, also, there's lynching. In the North, however, there is railway. So a lot of people are able to travel. And there's also a lot of encouragement and instruction published by the Black press. So you could separate these if you wanted into push and pull factors. So that railway system might be a pull, Black press is a pull, lynching is a push, environment is push, and this is a pull. But the effects, just like we talked about before, this is just the overview of just like what we talked about before. You have Black culture in LA, and the Bay, in New York City, in Chicago, in Pitt. Black culture gets to develop in a lot of these places. The African American population, instead of living in rural areas, is urbanized. Let me star this page because I do think this is important to know. And I'll put these slides up somewhere later. And then you have racial intentions, which are increasing. A lot of people are going to be unjustly arrested because of a lot of conflict between Black and white people. So even you've got like you get organizations which are meant to help combat this issue, like the National Urban League, which is founded in New York City, which is an interracial organization, and it's supposed to help Black Americans who are immigrating from the South. And they're later huge supporters of, the 1941 March on Washington, the Civil Rights Movement, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, basically all those big things that you learn about in history class. We can also learn about, when we're talking about migrations, here's another one I would know, Afro-Caribbean migration. So we have the First World War, which is causing the decline of a lot of these Caribbean economies that are suffering. We have this kind of turn of events. U.S. These political economic interests, they're expanding in the Caribbean anyways. Like the United States is trying to acquire the Panama Canal, and they do so in 1903. But so a lot of people come to the U.S. It's something like 140,000. And this is the period between 1899 and 1937, and most of them are settling in Florida and New York. It's going to spark some tensions, like many mass migrations too, but it's also going to create new blends of Black culture, increasing religious and linguistic diversity. Tensions on one side, diversity on another. So many of them are going to contribute to intellectual and social movements that they're going to bring new perspectives. And finally, here, this is the last bullet point. This is 3.18, which is the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Yeah, it can be kind of weird to see stuff like the Afro-Caribbean migration and then see World War One, right? Because World War One kind of gets glazed over in this course. The main things I would know here is like resentment towards Black veterans, also the First World War causing the Afro-Caribbean migration. This is kind of a confusing thing because this really isn't covered in many history classes in general. Know that before World War One. Know when Nadir was happening. That's kind of related. This is the end of Unit 3. The last person I would know from Unit 3 is Marcus Garvey. And he founds this organization, which is supposed to unite, just like we were talking about all these Afro-Caribbean immigrants. He wants to unite all Afro-descendant people. So there are thousands of members of these across the Caribbean, Latin America, Africa, and he wants to liberate every single Afro-descendant person from colonialism. He creates this flag, which is still used, which has the red, black, green flag. You guys have probably seen it before. He founds a steamship company. This part is a little controversial. He founds a steamship company with the purpose of taking African Americans to Africa. He makes the phrase Africa for the Africans, but he does inspire a lot of people to embrace the shared heritage. So he is, I would know, a pan-Africanist. So that's what you should know about Marcus Garvey. He is really pro-Africa. He wants everybody to, he wants a lot of people to go back to Africa. He wants everybody to really be really proud of African heritage. Okay, now I can get to Unit 4, everyone. All right, goodbye to everyone but SAO for the night. Before we get to Unit 4, any questions? Are we ready to jump in? Are we doing good? I wouldn't say Booker T. Washington and WEB are good or bad necessarily. It's just that Booker T. Washington wants people to focus on getting jobs before they do anything political. And Du Bois wants everyone to be political right away, and he doesn't want to wait. So it's just they have different approaches. So when we get, let's get to Unit 4. This is kind of just background. We have these movements called negritude and negrismo, which are 1930s to 1950s. And these are kind of precursor to Black is Beautiful. And then both of them, this one is more French speaking. This is the Spanish speaking. Both of them are from the Caribbean. But these are going to focus on contributions that they've made to Latin American folklore, music, and art. Right here, we're having people who are protesting colonialism and whitewashing. They're just anti-whitewashing, and they want Black contributions to be recognized, right? And these movements aren't in the USA. But African Americans are going to take inspiration from this. So then we get to the Black Freedom movement, some more background, which is again an umbrella term. And that is the term for the broader struggle for Black liberation. So civil rights and Black power. To show that they have solidarity with the Black freedom movement, a lot of the leaders are visiting Africa. So we have people like the Republic of Ghana gets independence from British colonial rule, and then you have Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and they show up to show support. We have the boxer. Joe, this guy travels to Cuba. He wants to promote it as a tourist declaration. This is also a lot of the time, you might have learned this in AP Euro, the 1960, this is a lot of decolonial stuff, is the Year of Africa. Think of Unit 4 as basically everything from Second World War onwards. So we have this Black Freedom Movement. Oh, this Year of Africa is happening because 17 nations independent are declaring their independence. A lot of people are decolonializing, and then obviously you have people like Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X are there supporting that. So you have the Second World War. The U.S. Armed Forces, believe it or not, were still segregated at the time of World War II. But despite that, 2 million Black Americans are still existed. So I would know the Tuskegee Airmen might get brought up. And they are the first African American pilots. The U.S. military, that is. So they're in the Air Corps, which is basically the early Air Force. There is the Double V campaign. which I think might even be more relevant, which is fight fascism abroad. We want double victory. And then fight Jim Crow at home. Or fight Jim Crow era segregation at home. Another thing that has to get brought up a lot is the GI Bill of 1944, which is giving funds. Think of this kind of like just the Freedmen Bureau's funds for like college tuition. Low cost home mortgages, low interest startup loans. These are for veterans. And this is supposed to be a huge benefit to veterans, right? GI Bill is supposed to be seen as a net positive, but because these funds are administered locally, we drop the ball on this one, and a lot of Black veterans never get them. But technically, it's still like in legislation, or the sentiment of it is still supposed to be positive, right? Okay, now we're getting to the modern day. A lot of things like civil rights movement that you guys have probably heard brought up before. So we kind of had this regressing period where first we had Reconstruction, which seemed really positive, and then we had an end of Reconstruction, and then we had Nadir, right? Let me actually write this out as a timeline. Because I know a lot of people have been asking this. I would love to see you guys comment with your score, actually. I'll put up a community post for when that happens. We have the Civil War, we have Reconstruction, and then we have Nadir, World War II. Right, so we have progressed to the last place on this timeline. We are now in the civil rights movement. And so this is people, they're looking back at Reconstruction and they're seeing, hey, we had so many rights at the Reconstruction Amendments and the Civil Rights Act of 1875. 1875, that's crazy, but they're promising. So now we have 1954. Brown v. Board finally says that segregated schools are unconstitutional. So we undo this genuinely terrible court case. We are going to talk about the doll test, which is something actually that I think would be good to bring up in an FRQ. This is a really, really sad test where basically these kids get shown dolls, and the Black American kids tend to choose the white dolls. They can't identify for a reason for it. When they're asked why they choose the white dolls over the black dolls, a lot of them will call them names or they'll start crying on the spot. It's terrible. But so this is their justification for overturning Plessy v. Ferguson, and now we're saying segregation is bad. Who would have thought? So there's still like de facto segregation here. So white families are like fleeing to these private schools. But this is technically seg in schools, not okay. Even though we have still some white flight to private schools. You can still kind of see that if anyone wants a sophistication point, and there ends up being an FRQ on this, talk about school choice vouchers today. We still have people fleeing to private schools. No shade to any of those private schoolers out here. Something that I would actually really know here, we're getting to some really important stuff again, is the Little Rock Nine. To these group of 9 students in Little Rock. They're just trying to go to a school. This is where we get Ruby Bridges, and they're trying to integrate into schools. They are literally just kids trying to go to school, but they're facing some crazy backlash, and people lashing out against them. We literally get the president has to send down troops just to make sure that people don't hate crime these small children while they are trying to attend school. So Little Rock 9 is example of integration, but it's also an example of backlash. So honestly, if you get an FRQ that happens to be on segregation in schools, no matter what the topic is, throw Little Rock Nine in there, talk about it. Uh, but not only is there discrimination in schools, there's housing discrimination. So the Federal Housing Administration is supposed to be the super great um, administration that is going to give housing to places or is going to let people get mortgages earlier or easier. But instead, what it does is it literally makes it illegal for Black Americans to live in certain places. So the NAACP is fights this. They try to get Fair Housing Act. They tried to get the Fair Housing Act of 1968 passed. Because what the Federal Housing Administration does a lot is redlining. This is another vocab term. This is kind of like a hotbed of really important vocab terms to know. That was misspelled. Redlining is the practice of denying mortgages to people because they live in many areas with people of color. So Black Americans in wealthy neighborhoods are also facing mob violence. Black Americans in poor neighborhoods, often they're not having public transportation, they're not having clean water, they're not having close health care services, they don't have infrastructure, right? So no matter whether you live in a wealthy neighborhood, just like we remember before, if you were employed or you were unemployed, you were kind of screwed either way. So in response, some of them are going to open. Here's some positive things that you can always mention at FRQ is something like jitneys buses that so these are buses that are providing taxi services and letting you go from place to place. So a lot of Black Americans are starting their own bus companies because again this issue with transportation. This whole issue with transportation is really going to lead up to just like Rosa Parks, what everyone learns with the Outcast song and everything else later on. So when it comes later on, let's talk about these civil rights organizations. So these are the big four. And I'm going to just write the acronyms for these because these are so long. But these are people who are staging march-ins, they're staging sit-ins, litigation, they're doing boycotts. They're often met with violence, even though what they're doing is actually the vast majority of the time incredibly nonviolent. So this is the SNCC, which is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is quite literally the opposite of violent. So we call these the Big Four. So NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. This is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. This is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and this is the Congress of Racial Equity. So we have the Birmingham's Castle Crusade. Let's see. Or Birmingham's Children Crusade. My bad. So here's some civil rights things that are happening, big events. This is a really controversial one. So there's going to be this crusade, which is basically a march, where we have this premise of like, oh, these people aren't going to hurt children, so we're going to march with these children alongside us. And they also have these other reasoning for children marching alongside them or being near them, which is that children don't have to worry about losing a job. Children don't have to worry about a stable income. People really don't think these children are going to get hurt, right? Because nobody's going to hurt a 5-year-old. Apparently, local police do not care about harming children, and a lot of people end up getting really hurt by the Birmingham Children Crusade. It is really quite negative. We have the March on Washington. Again, these are really big in raising awareness. They're huge. They're pivotal. 1963, and this is probably what we know the MLK Jr. from the most. Martin Luther King Jr. He gives this "I have a dream." Bro has a dream. We have the Mississippi Freedom Summer. I don't know how you abbreviate Mississippi, but I'm assuming that. So it's this campaign that to register as many African American voters. I think every single one of the examples on this page would be really positive to put on FRQ, right? So, campaign to register as many African American voters as physically possible in Mississippi. You have 41 freedom schools, which are just supposed to teach people about civic activism, but you do have 3 young activists killed. One of them is black, 2 of them are Jewish. It's terrible that they're killed anyways. You can just see how bad race relations are at this point in time, but they do spread the movement forward. So all these things together are super instrumental. They really change the game, in that they end up getting the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is big to know. March in Washington was one of the biggest protests ever. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which is what they had been campaigning for the entire time. This legislation, which is going to finally make these changes in securing the rights that African Americans were guaranteed with Reconstruction, so they can freely vote. They're registered to vote. They're treated equally in schools. They're treated equally in public spaces. Discrimination is illegal. Just think Voting Rights Act of 1965, 1964. These are actually dates that I think are worth memorizing, even though I'm generally someone who's against any date memorization at all. These are really, really important to know. Right. So some people that we might want to know from these major organizations is like Ella Baker, who is the mother of the civil rights movement. She gives a speech at the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee founding. She talks about peaceful sittings. You have, let's see, Fannie Lou Hamer. We could go on and talk about DBAQs right after this, guys. We are over halfway done with Unit 4. We should be good. We have people who are doing boycotts. Just know how important boycotts are. Half of New York City's entire student body boycotts school in 1964 to protest segregation. Yes, remember intersectionality with these, because these people, when we're talking about women, women are having to navigate the experience of being a woman and facing this unique oppression on every side of the coin. And they're also having to navigate being a minority, being a person of color in a country that is at the time predominantly white. So intersectionality would be a really good word to use on any kind of FRQ. We are going to get into, let's see, here's just some examples that I'm going to quickly cover that I don't think you need to have memorized by any means. We have some poets. You have some musicians who make songs like We Shall Overcome, which are protest songs, the gospel anthems that are going to be used when people are at protests. You have the Black Power movement, which I think is probably more important to know for the sake of an exam, and Black religious nationalism. So this is where we have our Malcolm X come in. In fact, I am going to... That was really convoluted. But Malcolm X is coming in. So we have, with Black religious nationalism, we have the Nation of Islam. It's basically these Black nationalists. Remember, we just talked about Delaney and Black nationalism, but a lot of these people are going to convert to Islam. This is founded in 1930. So many of them get rid of the last names. Like James Baldwin talks about it. A lot of people's at this time, their surnames are chosen by slave owners. So a lot of them get rid of these. They replace them with the letter of X. That's where Malcolm X comes from. Elijah Muhammad encourages a lot of followers to adopt Muslim last names, which you can tell by his right there. So these people are people who really don't believe racial integration is going to work by being nice. They're defending the right to self-defense, right? So Malcolm X is defending the right to vote, the right to bear arms. Malcolm X is actually eventually leaves. He doesn't leave Black Power, but he leaves the Nation of Islam because and he decides to be a regular Muslim. It just isn't for him. But he stays with the Black Panther Party for self defense. Yes, Malcolm X was Muslim. I'm just now seeing that in the chat. Yeah, that's what Nation of Islam implies. So the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense is this huge Black Power organization. It's inspired by Malcolm X. They have this agenda called the 10-point program. Guys, these guys are so influential in your daily lives if you go to a public school. I'm not going to write everything down, but they want freedom from oppression. They don't want to be mass incarcerated anymore. They say they need access to housing. They need access to healthcare. They want education. They want employment. These are all demands they have. The one thing that they do that is talked a lot about in media is they use the Second Amendment. They bear arms. So you'll find people standing outside of buildings in order to make sure that things are peaceful. They're holding weapons on them, right? So in response, the FBI themselves is going to rage a campaign against the Black Panthers because they are truly believing that the Black Panthers are a threat to national security. But in the meantime, the Black Panther Party is doing a lot of really awesome things. They introduced free breakfast for school children. They are the entire reason that you get free breakfast in schools nowadays. They introduced legal aid offices. They give literal free healthcare and free clothing to people. Chapters are also often led by, let's go back to intersectionality, they're often led by women. The Black Panther Party basically wholly entirely shapes like how America functions today. They do stuff that is basically way ahead of their time, or like not even widely adopted nowadays. Super, super important. One thing I would just remember is free breakfast if you're not going to remember anything else. Just say they gave free vaccines to people, guys. It was crazy. Remember, they had this 10-point program where they really demanded equal rights for every Black person in America. So now you have stuff. Again, people are really embracing Blackness. You have Black arts. You have Black is beautiful. Michelle Obama is, in fact, about free food at school, but she was not the first. We have Afrocentricity. You have the Black feminist movement. Womanism. This is where we get into some of the intersectionality stuff. Black is beautiful and Afrocentricity are movements to embrace Black beauty specifically. So a lot of them are about hairstyles. Uh, they celebrate Kwanzaa. They have hair wraps. They reject whitewashing. Afrocentricity has a little bit. Some people argue it's oversimplified, but these are just movements to embrace the beauty of Blackness, basically. When it comes to the Black feminist movement and womanism and intersectionality, we have the Combahee River Collective. I don't think you even necessarily need to know who they are. I think you just argue some people said this. But what they argue, basically, they're named after Harriet Tubman's Combahee River Raid, so that's where the relation is. Is they think that Black women being free is going to make everyone else free. Because if you free Black women, you admit that racism is bad, you admit that sexism is bad, you admit that classism is bad. So they say if we focus on the freedom of Black women, we're basically freeing everyone else at the same time. So Alice Walker is Alice Walker is coins the term womanist. I'll write that. And we're getting pretty late in the unit right now. This is 1980s. So this is feminism, but with an emphasis on racial experiences too. We have Crenshaw, who coins the term intersectionality. We can talk about Afrofuturism. We have Patricia Collins. And I don't think you need to memorize every single one of these words. You might see them brought up, but if you want to memorize a definition, like you can memorize intersectionality, you can memorize womanist. I would actually really know intersectionality. There's this interlocking systems of oppression, which Patricia Hill Collins writes about being part of intersectionality. Maud Martha is by Gwendolyn Brooks, and their novels with characters who face these issues. Just interlocking systems of oppression is kind of like what the Comedy River Collective is talking about, saying race, gender, class, sexuality, disability. People don't have just one of these things. You don't pick and choose, right? All of them can exist at the same time, and they can kind of echo off each other and cause even more oppression, right? So nowadays, let's see. We're starting to talk about like even 2016 now. Not the Snapchat filters, but discrimination is still existing, right? In the economic sphere, right? So in 2016, I'm going to say these out loud because you're not going to need to know these, but the median black wealth for black families is 17,150. The median wealth for white families is 171,000. So that is a 10 times difference, which is clinically insane, right? So even though there's these huge disparities, right, we've still come a long way. So remember those 1950s to 60s desegregation that really helped. By 2019, nearly a quarter of African American adults had earned a bachelor's degree. Ideally, we want that 100%, right? But a quarter is definitely progress, and HBCUs really helped us get there. Urbanization ended up giving a lot more opportunities to African Americans. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 helped give more representation of Black Americans in government. We have the first Black woman elected to Congress in 1968, and she founds the Congressional Black Caucus. Colin Powell becomes the first Black Secretary of State under Bush. And eventually, Kamala Harris and Barack Obama become the first Americans, this is in the College Board CED, to hold such positions ever in the entirety of United States history. DBQ after, guys. DBQ after, I promise. Right? So this is more stuff that I'm just going to say out loud because basically all you need to know for the fact is progress is being made, because after that you can pretty much freeball. So Black college degrees. Here, I'll write the word college. So Black college degree holders have more than doubled since just 2000 alone. The number of Black immigrants has increased. The Black identifying population is still a minority, right? But it's 14% of the US population today. The religious leaders are still strong. There's still a place of community. We still have gospel and blues, but like those became the foundation eventually for rock and roll. Elvis did not invent that. They added new rhythms, added electric instruments, laid the foundation for rock and roll. You get hip hop, which is born out of Black and Latinx members of the Bronx, and they're rhyming, they're using turntables, they're mixing and scratching, they're inventing breakdancing, which is really terribly performed at the Olympics. They invent graffiti art, right? So a lot of changes in art, in theater and film, just like we talked about in photography. Now there's Black art in film that challenges stereotypes, kind of like photography. Soul Train exists, which is a dance program, and yeah, this is what I was referencing. The College Board CED references the French Prince of Bel-Air as an example you should know of a show showing a strong Black family unit on camera. Yes, first Black woman to elected to Congress is how the College Board CED describes her. Thank you for that in chat. College Board CED also talks about sports. Here, I'll just put just the categories we're talking about here. Talking and writing at the same time is so difficult, you guys. Beginning in Reconstruction, Black Americans are still breaking barriers in sports, right? So you have people winning the Kentucky Derby in 1875 and 1877. You have in 1985, they go on to found the Colored Hockey League, which exists even before the National Hockey League ever exists. Segregation leads a lot of Black Americans to create their own leagues, right? Jackie Robinson was the first Black player in Major League Baseball, something that a lot of us know. But before that, a lot of Black Americans were competing in their own leagues. Olympians, Jesse Owens is winning a lot of medals, and then gets discriminated against when they return, which is terrible. But Muhammad Ali is an advocate. He refuses to enlist in the army or participate in the Vietnam War because racism is at home. Tommy Smith, John Carlos, they raised the Black Power fist. Again, this is in the College Board CED. And other NFL players in 2016 is began kneeling for national anthem, right? Just generally huge movements in sports for representation. I swear LeBron was in here, guys. But we get STEM. I can put some of these names in 1 second. Yes, Jesse Owens is the one who wins 4 gold medals at the 1936 Olympics and then faces a lot of discrimination. But um, I will probably put a list of these names. I'll post this right after. I would just memorize maybe one or two. You don't. They're not going to ask you who won the Kentucky Derby in 1875. You guys will be fine about this. But yeah, they do like to talk about a lot about like Black celebrations, Black movements, sports and stuff like that. But generally, you won't have to have actually memorized each individual one of these. You'll recall an example, or you're connected to a broader theme when you're doing something like an FAQ. So when we have STEM in the Black community, one person that you guys probably should know is George Washington. A lot of these people have the last name Washington, if we didn't pick that up from Booker T. Washington. George Washington Carver is born enslaved, but he becomes an botanist and professor, and he revolutionizes the way we grow peanuts, which is pretty awesome and cool. He just does a lot of stuff in the field of botany. George Washington Carver, you can look him up. You have Katherine Johnson and Mae Jemison, who are mathematicians for NASA, and they're also astronauts, which is really cool and really awesome. And you also have the Black Hospital movement. Maybe this would be something that's nice to know. Yes, Peanut Guy, also my goat. He is a Black Hospital movement. We're collaborating with local governments to establish non-segregated hospitals. This is so like 1800s and 1900s because it's the late 19th century. Or no, Black Hospital movement is in the mid 20th century. That's my bad. But we're trying to establish non-segregated hospitals, right? So medical schools are HBCUs because earlier Black medical professionals literally couldn't enter the American Medical Association, that is. As let's see, the first Black-owned hospital gets founded in 1891, and they do the world's first successful heart surgery. Let's see, we have a Black American who helps develop the Moderna COVID-19 mRNA vaccine. We have a lot of recent events here. Yeah, Rihanna being on there is not the most surprising. But you also have eugenics on the rise too, which are contributing to the oppression of people with disabilities. But the Americans with Disabilities Act is the reason that we talk about eugenics being on the rise is because the Americans with Disabilities Act is going to build on the same civil rights legislation that outlawed Jim Crow. So we see how the same legislation that's outlawing Jim Crow is really helping Americans, whether Black or not. I would love to see an FRQ that is just on the Kendrick Lamar halftime show. I think that would be really enjoyable to do. All right, I think that is all of Unit 4. So when it comes to Unit 4, again, the main things I would focus on knowing would be the origins of the civil rights movement. Just know about the civil rights movement, right? So we were talking about housing discrimination, the federal housing discrimination, and redlining. Really know what redlining is because I think it will come up. Stuff like the major civil rights organizations, Black women who are in these major civil rights organizations, maybe, or like intersectionality of women, who really know about like the civil rights movement, the Black Panther Party for self-defense. I think those are the main ones that I would cover. The Black freedom. All right, are we ready to look at some FRQs, SAQs? SRQs are a type of FRQ. I promise I know, guys. Oh my. Full disclosure, these are not ones that I've looked at in extensive detail. I do throw them into the end of things a lot. But redlining is, remember, it's denying mortgages to people based on how many Black people live in their neighborhood. But these FRQs, we're going to pop some on the board and we're just going to look through examples and I can read through the Chief Reader Report. I've got a good format for how to review these, so if you guys have other ideas, please feel free. So this, I think, is the 2025, I want to say. Yes, this is 2025 set 1 of free response questions. I wonder what the best format is with you guys. Do you guys want me to give you a little bit of time and I can read through Chief Reader Reports and then I give you summaries on each one? We can end off stream here soon, or I can give some tips on the different ones. We can go over the structure of these actually. So we have, just like it talks about, so you're going to have section 2, which is going to have 3 short answer questions, and it's going to have 1 document-based question, right? So the short answer questions, the general advice on these is going to be that you really don't need more than a couple sentences. Keep it short. They're just trying to check off points, right? In SAQs, there's not a fancy special thing where they say, wow, that used the word juxtaposition. And they give you a high five, and then all the AP graders jump and gallivant into the sunset, right? They just want to see that you described one claim the author made in the source. Often the first one is going to be the easiest, and then it'll get progressively harder. But it'll just ask you to, even if you don't know the source itself, right, you always want to try because it's going to pull in related things. So when you're describing one piece of evidence not included in the source, or you're explaining other things about Harriet Tubman, you don't actually have to have read Harriet Tubman's Reflection, the Refugee by Benjamin Drew. So it's going to be the same things. We have, let's see, what farther in the past. We have one here. This one doesn't have a source in the first place. That's common with these third ones. One thing that was talked about a lot on these Chief Reader Reports is that people really struggled with the questions about ancient African societies. So remember stuff from Unit 1 like Ghana, Mali, Songhai, those are the Sudanic empires, Aksumite Empire, the Nok, all of these different groups tend to kind of get mixed together in people's heads. So try to remember at least 1 or 2 and remember them strongly. The Sudanic empires are really good ones to know because they are pretty distinct from one another, but similar enough. So I think Ghana, Mali, and Songhai are ones that College Board really likes to hit. So when we have our DBQ, another thing is you don't, even if you're intimidated by the topic of the DBQ itself, I think I would recommend, there are a lot of sources on YouTube for this. I think Highbler is good. The DBQ is not going to differ from any other DBQ that you do. It's the same for APUSH, it's the same for AP Euro, it's the same for, I think World has one. So this one is talking about the cultural contributions of African Americans to Jim Crow segregation. You're going to want, again, the DBQ, they have one for sophisticated reasoning, but I would try to get to the point with DBQs, really try to kind of keep it simple. Stupid is the motto. You want to have a clear thesis, obviously. What I always like to do with DBQs is write your thesis first, right? And then go back, put your cursor before before the thesis, and then write just a couple of sentences of historical context leading up to that point, and that will let them check off the historical context at DBQ, right? I think when it comes to DBQ number of sources used, I normally end up using 4, but it looks like the DBQ on this one is pretty short. My strategy with these is to read the documents very quickly, and then I'll group them together into 2 or 3 categories based on themes. You don't have to quote the documents. I would just summarize them instead. Some people say that the DBQ graders like to see people quote some and then summarize them in order to show complexity, but I think that's more of an AP Lang thing. I think you can get away with summarizing. Just make sure you put source 3 in parentheses at the end. Um, Bringing in outside knowledge, good thing to do. Make sure you spend plenty of time outlining before you write. Please, 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 please outline. Um, make sure you're using that outside evidence because you want to gain all oh my gosh, you want to gain all points. Well, when it comes to outside evidence, remember, you don't actually have to remember the name of Phyllis Wheatley's poems. You just want to bring up examples from the past, examples of people, examples of events, examples of even places or movements. Any of those things can count as outside evidence. They're really just trying to check a box for you. All right, so we could look at some example DBQs and SAQs from the past. I can answer questions for a bit. It looks like we're talking about Sudanic empires at the moment. I can go back and do. I actually have. You know what, you guys? I made a whole document for Unit 1 and Unit 2 review. If we want to look at Sudanic empires, we can go back to this for a moment. The main thing with Sudanic empires, you could probably infer that colonists are going to be there, but the only thing that College Board explicitly puts on their SAQ is that, or explicitly puts on their course and exam description, is that they are in contact with salt traders from the north and gold from the south. And that's really the reason that the Sudanic empires do so good. If I could bring us up to this map up here, is because they're located in a region between the north and the south, right? So we have Ghana at first, which also gets rich off these gold mines and these trade. Yes, okay. I'm glad we do a Sudanic Empire. And we can get to Swahili and Zimbabwe, actually. I think those are really easy to know when you get them. Uh, Ghana is the first one, and basically you just need to know Ghana has these things in common, right? They have gold mines, access to gold mines. They have access to salt traders from north, right? It's just they have good location. They have the best of both worlds, and so everybody that wants to trade ends up going through them, right? So then we got to Mali. Um, Mali still is rich off those salt traders and that gold, but now we have Islam introduced, right? And we have Mansa Musa who does this whole Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca, and he converts to Islam, and everybody else says, "Well, I guess our ruler is Muslim now. I guess we should be too." And so we have this really peaceful adoption of Islam, right? So again, that's countering stereotypes about the societies not having converted to Islam or Christianity willingly. A lot of them too. In Mali, something you might want to know is Timbuktu. We have university, book trade, astronomers, mathematicians, architects. There's so much more. Timbuktu is just we use it as a word for something that is super super far away, but Timbuktu is for Islamic ones, Swahili city-states are also Islamic, but Timbuktu also has griots. They're just a huge learning place. Griots, I don't think you'll need to know too much about the fact that women tell more community stories and men do community stories, but griots are these super prestigious figures who basically tell stories. They're historians of their communities, right? They still exist. They make sure that they remember the stories and the morals and the wars of the past, right? Queen Anzinga and Queen Gia are not the same people. I will show it in 1 second if we want to talk about female leaders, and I can share a lot of slides afterwards. I wonder if I can post them on my Buy Me a Coffee for free. Guys, the YouTube community page really is not good. We can go to the queens in 1 second. I have that written over here. Songhai, the dates look kind of confusing on these. Basically, all you need to know is Mali in like the 14th century, they end up kind of hitting their peak and then they just fall down. And Songhai basically, technically Mali outlasts them, but then Songhai basically pretty much overtakes Mali. They're the last, they're the largest. There's not as much trans-Saharan trade anymore because the Portuguese come and that's basically what ends them off. But you should just know these 3 in this order. GMS. You guys can come up with acronyms for that. am sure you got that. That is fine. Let's talk about culture, trade, the Swahili city-states and the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, right? I will go over marine communities, and we can go over Queen Adia too, okay? I'll do this, and then we'll talk about feminism. We'll talk about Queen Anjia and Queen Idea and all those other people. So the Swahili city-states, you should know this map. This is a crazy looking map, right? Hey, so this is the Swahili coast where all these people are trading. They have access to Arab goods, Persian goods, Indian goods, Chinese goods, right? So they become big traders, and they have to talk to each other because they're traders, obviously. So they end up all speaking Swahili. They also all end up converting to Islam. So the people of them are Muslim. They are eventually invaded by the Portuguese, which you will almost definitely not need to know. But these Swahili states are really rolling in it, right? They are super rich. They also trade with the Kingdom of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is home to the Shona people. Zimbabwe is not one of the Swahili city states, but it is just happen to be close to them because it's technically landlocked. It technically doesn't touch the ocean. You should know that they are really known for their architecture. I'll go to Maroons after I go to feminism. They have gold, ivory, cattle. They're super rich. The Shona people have like currency and things like that. They have architecture. This is the Great Enclosure, right, which has this giant cone-shaped thing that historians think is a granary. It might have stored grain, but this is like an administrative place, basically. Kingdom of Zimbabwe, really awesome. Just think about it like it looks like it has all giant castles. So we can look over to, let's see, I said I'd talk about women, right? Let me see where I threw that on here. Oh, let's see, kingship and political leadership. So these are the two ones that College Board asked you to know about when they want you to know about the leadership of women. Queen Anjia, right, is resisting the transatlantic slave trade. She is doing guerrilla warfare and she's resisting the transatlantic slave trade, just as we said. She is a huge fighter. She's also, I put in here, she kidnapped some people from rival tribes in order to fund her war, which is a little bit controversial. But all in all, she ends up preventing a ton of people from entering into the transatlantic slavery. She does as much as she can to help her people, right? And those are from the kingdoms of Ndongo and Matamba, which I don't think you'll need to remember their dates. Benin, right? Queen Adia is the first Ioba, which is the queen mother. This mask is eventually going to become a pan-African symbol. It's going to be shown at conferences, things like that. They're really demonstrating that female leaders are taken really seriously in the communities. And Ioba is someone who also, just like Queen Anjia, is an army commander. She's also a political advisor. But at the same time, she's kind of a spiritual figure. That's would be, to me, be the difference. They both do warfare. Anjia does guerrilla warfare, but Adia does a lot more of the spiritual, basically, work in her community. Let's see. What other areas are we thinking of looking at? I've got some 2A stuff here. We can talk about the ancient societies again, because I know that's largely missed. Or we can wrap up. I know it's getting close to 1 a.m. What? All right. I think I'm going to do a quick run through. We can go back to Seminoles and Maroons if we want, actually. I think I promise to cover that at some point. Besides that, I think we're gonna wrap up for the night after that. If we have nothing in particular, I'll go to Maroons. Let me pull up my notes on this. Okay, so the Maroons are people who are African American freedom seekers, right? They're escaping into remote areas and they're forming their own independent communities. So they are running from their independent communities. So one of them is joining the Seminoles in Florida. And the Seminoles in Florida are Pulling up notes, my guys. Let's see. So we're fighting alongside indigenous people. They're helping them resist relocation. Right. So these Maroons also, besides joining indigenous communities, finding things, they also formed their own independent communities. The Seminoles are just an indigenous community, so think it like Native Americans generally. Oh, Unit Two. In this, we'll talk. We can talk about Creoles in a second. Is covers a huge chunk of things. Unit 2 is everything that is enslavement and then resistance to enslavement. So just think basically the entire transatlantic slave trade. And they cover a little bit of stuff before that, like Ladinos and Creoles, and the lead up. But it's basically about enslavement at its core. So Maroons is some of them are going to integrate into indigenous communities. Some of them are going to be these freedom speakers who escape into remote areas. But however, I will say their status is varied from tribe to tribe. So something we should know about indigenous communities mistreated in the United States by a large degree. But there were tribes, for example, like the five civilized tribes, which are named that by the United States government, who were uh, able to have slaves. So they took slaves with them during the Trail of Tears. They formed slave patrols. They captured black people who fled for freedom. This made black indigenous kinship a lot weaker. But at the same time, there was support in other communities. What we should generally know is indigenous people aren't a monolith. They're wildly different from tribe to tribe. And so their legacy is going to be as well. Seminoles, I think we looped in there. Did you guys want to know about Creoles? Creoles is basically, so this is some background. With indigenous communities, with the five civilized tribes, we do see lots of evidence of the practicing of chattel slavery. And in fact, actually, there's a little bit of controversy because some of these people were able to continue the practice of slavery even after slavery was technically formally abolished because the United States jurisdiction over indigenous tribes is a little bit finicky, right? We can do Yes, we can do the conquistadors also. So remember from Unit 1, they're African people living in Europe way before the transatlantic slave trade. They're exploring in Europe. They're doing a lot of travel in Europe. They're knights, they're guards, they're entertainers, all sorts of stuff like that. So a lot of them end up becoming really familiar with European traditions. So, and those are considered Creoles. Atlantic Creoles is the word. So it means people of African descent who understand both African and European countries. Customs, that is. And because they're so linguistically diverse, they're able to do all sorts of jobs, right? So within Spain and Portugal specifically, they called them Ladinos. Spanish word. These are Afro-descendant people who became Hispanicized over time. So they're familiar with Spanish and Portuguese language. They're familiar with cultures, customs. So these are basically Afro-descendant people who live in Spain and Portugal largely. So in the early 16th century, Ladino people are present on the voyages of Spanish people who are exploring the Americas. They're helping with colonization efforts, which is not a great thing to say out loud. But they also help with the takeover of Georgia, South Carolina, and La Florida. So they do a variety of jobs, right? We do conquistadors. They do enslaved labor, and some of them are artisans or they're skilled workers, also free, right? So we see there's a variety of roles, variety of different levels of social status. There's conquistadors. All these people are on the ships of like Hernan Cortez, so many other explorers that you learn about in things like AP Euro. The two people that I think are explicitly listed on the course and exam description are Juan Garrido, he's born in the Kingdom of Congo, but he moves to Lisbon. He's a free man when he moves to Lisbon. So just like was said in chat, he's free. He explores modern day Florida as part of a Spanish expedition in 1513, and he is the first known African in North America. So he is serving the Spanish military. He's doing the work of colonialism, and he's conquering indigenous people. He's taking their land. Yes, Guangerdo is the first. The other person who I would know who's in this category of Ladinos is Esteban. He's also known as Estebanico. He's an African healer from Morocco, so he's not conquistador. And he's enslaved by the Portuguese. He's sold to the Spanish. He's forced to work in Texas. He does exploring. He does translating. Eventually, he's going to be killed by native peoples in their fight against Spanish colonialism. The details of it are kind of disputed. You won't need to know that. I would just know he is a healer, he is an explorer, he's a translator, and these are two really important figures when it comes to Latinos and Creoles. Okay, I think we're about ready to wrap up. Any last minute questions I can answer? Juan Guaido was not born in Spain. He was born in the Kingdom of Congo, and then he moves to Lisbon, Portugal, and he's a free man. Always free. Kingdom of Congo, yeah, is where he's from. But I don't think that's something that you will need to know. These notes are going to be so messy, but I will update them to the best of my ability. Yes, conquistador versus healer, also free versus enslaved. Okay, guys. You guys also do, in fact, I don't know who's sleeping in before their exam, but exam being tomorrow. For a project, it is really something that your teacher is going to handle. I have heard many classes where everyone receives a perfect score on the project. I think you guys will be all right on one of that. Okay, I think we're gonna wrap up the stream today. I will be uploading notes. I know I talked about examples in sports that I would upload, examples, period. If I find any more DBQ notes, I will upload those because I know the structure on AFAM is a little bit different. I think besides that, we are wrapping up the stream for today. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you for coming, watching stream. You guys are gonna do great. You're gonna be fine. It is an AP exam in high school in the worst case scenario. And you guys reach out to me, comment on the YouTube page. I promise I do stalk them. My little sister actually stalks them for me, and she tells me whenever they tell me I'm popular. I appreciate you guys all right now, okay? Okay, I'm out. I'll see you everyone.